Hello and welcome to the Echo Chamber podcast. My name is Tony Groves and today I'm one third of what is about to be a bit of a departure from our usual podcast. Remember folks, the Echo Chamber podcast is a free-flowing conversation that may occasionally touch on mature subjects. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Martin McMahon.
How you doing there?
More importantly, I'm delighted to say that I'm joined via the magic of Skype all the way from Brazil by the angriest man on Twitter, Ewan MacKenna. How you doing, Ewan?
Angry.
the cliche, as you know, is that you need to be living under a rock not to know who Ewan is. But unfortunately, most people who know who Ewan is, are the kind of under a rock dwelling trolls. For those of you who don't know, Ewan is a former sports journalist of the year. He writes for the Irish Independent, the Sunday Business Post, the Sunday Times, the New York Times, ESPN, Bleacher Report. He writes for everyone basically. He's also a great follow on Twitter, unless, like me, you're a big fan of Dublin GAA. Thanks very much for coming on the pod, Ewan. There's a few
Absolute pleasure.
There's a few things I'm dying to ask you, but before I do, Martin made a great point earlier before we came on.
Yeah, it's about your pinned tweet, Ewan. And on your on your pinned tweet, you say, if you're not bitter and angry, you need to get out and meet more people. Is that what Brazil has done to you?
It's what humanity has done to me.
You have to explain, because we're the friendliest nation. We're the centre of the world here.
I've come to the conclusion that the majority of people are idiots. And I came to this conclusion some time ago. Now, at 33 years of age, that might be a bit soon. I don't want to know how I'll be at 53 years of age. But social media has done this to me. On the base, and I think I'm fascinated in sociology, and it's a fascinating insight into the minds of people that previously, before social media, a lot of people would have just gone quiet over certain topics. But in an era when you can hide behind pseudonyms and all of this sort of stuff, you start getting an insight into the mind of the masses, and it's depressing. People will say, why are you so angry? And I almost want to tell them, well, look around. But why aren't you angry? Look at the state of society, be that Ireland or Brazil, and look at the direction it's going. I remember Richard Dawkins on the Late Late back maybe a decade ago, and someone in the audience asked him, with evolution, where do you think humans will be in 100 years? Do you think we'll have wings and all this sort of stuff? And he said evolution has stopped. What we're having here is devolution.
It's not wrong.
It's not wrong. I think humanity peaked too soon for me, probably when I was a child, and now it's quite depressing, and you can see that economics. When I was growing up, people always talked about kind of 10% own 90% of the world's wealth. Then it became 1% own 99%. Now we're down to a couple of thousand people, and the masses buy into all this nonsense.
And do you not see the other side of social media, where it's bringing like-minded people together to fight the idiocracy?
You see, you can get cushy with like-minded people as well. I love intelligent debate where people have a go and they make a point and you kind of go, I never realised that. I think if you surround yourself with yes men, you get lazy, you stop thinking, and consensus is not a good thing.
I agree with you there. You don't want everybody. You want that guy on your shoulder that says you're just a man, you're just a man. That's the guy you want on your shoulder. You don't want the person that's telling you you're doing everything perfectly. You want the guy who's telling you what you're doing wrong.
No, it's true, but social media, again, I mean, it seems to be a combination of people who either surround themselves with like-minded people, thus don't experience the alternative view, or anyone who has an alternative view resorts to abuse, trolling, and I the amount of times you get, you're fishing or you're trolling because you made a point someone just doesn't agree with.
Or my favourite now is when you actually say something along the lines of that come on guys, we need to address, don't virtue signal. You're like, what the? We have a language built up of as you said, like where you're either in one faction or you're in the other, and like I know I'm when someone said to me recently, you called your podcast the Echo Chamber, I said, yeah, it's supposed to be ironic. We're trying to actually avoid that kind of what you call the people reinforcing your own views. But from a societal point of view, I see what you mean in terms of the actual like you made the point, I think we made the point on a podcast earlier that it's now down to something like 100 people have more wealth than the bottom 50% of the population, you know, and by any standards, actually, you know, this is the first generation, the 25 to 35 year olds, who are worse off than their parents were at that age. So we have actually devolved in many economic and socio-economic terms. But
I think in terms of the way we go about things as well, and not to get too dark too soon, but obviously we had that case recently of the Irishman and Leeds, and I regret watching it.
Yeah.
But I sat through the entire video and people say, "Oh, if you regret it, why did you watch it?" And it goes back to my interest in sociology and human behaviour. But I remember looking at it and thinking, on one side we've this guy who was there to do this, on the other side we've these people who did their job in a sense and what they purport to do, and they stopped him, but then kept him at the side of the road and just abused him for 40 minutes, sang football chants at him about how he's going to be locked away for prison. Then I looked at the comments underneath and people going on the guy's Facebook page, kind of just to have the worst go of it, and I just thought, what a world we live in. This is the most depressing thing I've seen in a long, long time.
We were just touching on this before we were talking to you, and there's an article, I think it's in the Irish Times, where a former Supreme Court judge was talking about a sentence for a man who was recently sentenced over child abuse, and she was saying that his status, his fall from grace, was enough of a punishment for this man. And I'm like, oh my God, do you not see that you're creating this vacuum that these people will step into, and they'll go out and solve the crimes, or they'll catch these people if you have no interest in doing it? I think one is as a result of the other. It's the yin and yang. There's no interest from the Supreme Court side, and so it's that vacuum is filled by the guys who are going to shout football chants for 40 minutes at somebody.
It's very dangerous though, because as much, and I know the case you're talking about, and I was stunned by the judge's ruling in that case as well, but as much as we might not be happy always with the law, I think the alternative is quite dangerous, because who polices it if we can go out in the streets and do what we want? Who draws the line of where enough is enough? What is enough? Who enforces that rule then? So, I mean, it's kind of going back to caveman stuff and a breakdown of society when people can take the law into their own hands because they're unhappy at something. That's not to say these people were wrong in stopping the Irishman and Leeds. It's not to say that the sentence you mentioned handed down was in any way adequate. But it's still better the alternative of having mobs of people who aren't equipped to deal with such complex things out in the street, losing the plot. And they may not, it might seem, okay, it was the right result in the end. But that's not to say, A, they do it for the right reasons, B, they always get it right. We've had many cases in the UK of these vigilante groups. I think there was one in Monastreven as well a couple of years back where a group got the wrong guy.
Well, we only have to look at the very simple case of the poor child being taken off the parents because she was blonde and blue-eyed, and they thought, well, the parents were Roma and that they couldn't have this child, and the reaction that happened on Facebook, if you remember at the time, where, you know, it all went down to the lowest base level of throw these people out of the country, and I'm like being very polite in some of the stuff I'm saying, but it was very vitriolic, and you know, we had people, we had sports stars coming in and dirtying their bib by coming in and, you know, being
That's right.
You know, what we had was an actual glimpse into what we don't like to talk about, that we're not that much different than anybody else as a country, really. We have you don't have to scratch the surface too deeply to find that the base level of man's inhumanity to man, I suppose.
No, you don't, and it's a very Irish thing of pointing the finger, but the mirror is a very difficult place, and we struggle with that. You don't have to sit on a bar stool very long in Dublin or Athy, where I'm from, or anywhere else, to kind of get, and especially this time of year, you'll kind of get the story of, oh, you know, that Nigerian family, they have 2 cars and their child has a new bike for Christmas, and all this sort of nonsense that goes on, and Jesus, the money they must be getting is savage, and but the mob is a terrifying thing, in general, and in the social media age more so. Now again, this is not to say what the guy did was in any way right and he didn't deserve what he's going to get, etc. But once everyone gets on your back, it actually can get in on you. And in far less important, just nonsensical stuff. I remember in the World Cup, for example, in 2014, and this isn't comparing one with the other, but just to demonstrate the mob. I remember there was a rumour going around the press area in one of the games that Cristiano Ronaldo was out of the World Cup. And I just said, rumour here, Cristiano Ronaldo is out of the World Cup. And I went to the toilet and I came back a couple of minutes later. And there must have been about 3,000 replies. There was one guy in Accra, Ghana, calling me the devil of Wednesday. Or this kind of thing. And just another insight into the kind of the amount of the brain that doesn't work in people.
And do you find that there's not much difference between Irish trolls or Brazilian trolls or the Brazilian idiocracy or the Irish idiocracy? It's like they're all one group.
I think when you're down here a long time, and I had an Irish friend, a Northern Irish guy, who lived down here for a decade, and he's just moved back to London, and I was only new here, and he'd be giving out about Brazilians and saying, blah, 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 I can't wait to move back, I haven't been home in a decade, I'm going to move to London and read newspapers and cafes in the morning and stuff, and he'd forgotten that it's not that different there.
Yeah.
And I'm getting to the stage now where it's a bit like that, where I might give it about the locals and there are different things. I mean, there are frustrating things. Nothing works here. Everything takes forever. The bureaucracy is crazy.
But that sounds just like home.
Not quite. I mean, it's nuts. I mean, I was on a bus hijacking recently. I was coming back from It was terrifying.
I remember this.
But I was coming back from a football match 12 hours away on a bus, and in the middle of the night a car rammed us and 5 guys got on with guns, and they tied up the driver in the toilet and they drove the bus off to a field and had us all at gunpoint and all of this sort of stuff. And when they left, I remember there was 3 groups of people I was stunned by on the bus. Firstly, there was a group of girls up front who started laughing before we were sure these guys had actually left and saying, oh, we got robbed in a supermarket recently. This is hilarious. Can you believe it's happened twice?
Yeah.
There was a group of religious women saying, well, we're not dead because I kissed my cross. And you're like, Jesus, Page Christ. And then there was one guy beside me who spent the next hour going around to everybody and telling them, everyone who'd lost everything, that they had left his bag by accident and he had nothing robbed, and celebrating this fact for the people who'd lost everything. And you're thinking, Jesus Christ, mate, shut up.
That would have been me. I have to say.
But I actually remember that incident because it was online. You put the stuff up, and I remember also that I'd say you only had to go 3 or 4 comments below where you had the people going, "Oh, I hope he doesn't make it," kind of thing. So it wasn't. It doesn't take long for them to emerge, but I know. You know, we do complain about Ireland, and I think we almost professionally complain about Ireland at this stage. But yeah, no. In terms of that, no, it's we're not quite at a fear of getting on the 46A to Stillorgan and worrying about being stopped by
No,
gunmen.
I mean it's nuts. You see with the police down here, Tony. You see they have their names on their bulletproof vest on the left, and then in red on the right they always have their blood type because it's only a matter of time. And they get paid minimum wage, these guys. The Policia Militare, you're looking at maybe €500 a month. And Brazil is not cheap. It's obviously cheaper than Ireland, but compared to wages, I mean, it's a much harder society to live in if your money isn't coming in foreign currency.
Yeah, no, it seems I know that they have had huge inflationary problems, and it's we again, within the OECD, Ireland is actually has had now one of the highest income inequalities develop over the last decade, which is we actually, if we didn't have social transfers like simple things like children's allowance and whatever family income supplement, we have an at-risk poverty rate of nearly 71% of people that without social transfers, it's staggeringly high, Ewan. But again, we do have the social transfers. We do have those family income supplement. That being said, the argument in Ireland now is obviously, and you'd probably be very, very aware of it, that all we're really doing is by doing these things like HAP and FIS is really just feathering the pockets or lining the pockets of private landlords, because that's where the money's going. It's going back into another property bubble. It
is, and I can see it from afar, and I never want to I never want to get sucked into the idea of kind of saying, when someone says things are bad in Ireland, I never want to say, well, Jesus, they're worse here, because if this becomes the level you measure anything by,
Yeah.
then developed countries are in big trouble. Here is not anything shouldn't be measured by here. In Ireland, it is though. It does trouble me. I mean, I part of me would love to move home. I'll move back to Europe next year, but it won't be Ireland because I can see it again. Everyone can see it. The same property bubble, the same guys, or maybe in their wives' names, who are becoming developers, and the same bullshit happening again. But again, you get the politics you vote for, and the amount of people. I mean, we talk in terms of politics. What we've seen over the last while is that turkeys do vote for Christmas.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And whether that be maybe the Rust Belt people in America voting for Trump, even though he'd spit on them if he could, whether that be Midlanders in England voting in something that favours Londoners almost via the Brexit, and it's going to do themselves more harm, or be it in Ireland, that same old civil war nonsense, and allowing people. I mean, the Rugby World Cup I found a great example of how people just kind of banded behind something. Won't it be great? We'll have a great time, sure. And I couldn't believe people were saying, but the government said it could be worth 800 million to 1.5 billion.
Yes.
Because they won't show us how it could be worth that, and B, as if they don't have a vested interest. I mean, it got to the stage where I was tempted to tweet, if everyone sends me 100 quid, Ireland will be better off next year, because people might buy that bullshit.
There was an interesting. I had I don't want to go, but I did have a tweet this week where I put up and said that the reason Ireland didn't get the European Banking Authority, and there was a comment made that it was that the Irish bid was described as Chernobyl trying to become the European Nuclear Authority. Now that was, and I can't name who said that, but it was said. And so I put it up, and this thing got, people, that's utter tripe, that's all of this. But there was an interesting contrast, because we missed out on what was actually, obviously, a job creator, and it would, a certain level of prestige with having this authority here, taking it from the City of London. But it was interesting that we lost that, and yet when we wanted the actual Rugby World Cup, Leo and Brian went out to London in their green ties and all the rest of it, and they all went to bat for that, whereas it's interesting. I didn't see it so much from heading up at the vanguard of what was actually something that may have had a lasting impact as an economy. Because I happen to think that's kind of, financial services are kind of for like it or lump it, they're a huge part of what we do here now.
Yeah, you're biased, Tony. You're just so biased. It's unreal.
A begrudger, to use that great word of anyone who that takes over. Anytime you question anything now, you're a begrudger.
Yeah. But I just thought it was an interesting thing, because I remember when we spoke to Paddy Cullivan on last Friday about the actual Rugby World Cup thing, and he made the point that, they got off the plane in Dublin, and then they had to get on a bus or a taxi or whatever it was to go see these things, and drive along Dorset Street and go, where's your metro, where's your train, where's your infrastructure? And then they went to Cork, and there was actually JCBs where there was supposed to be grass on the pitch, and yet we still went,
It was the whole thing was remarkable, and the amount of people. Like, I had one guy tell me when I talked about, well, we've no our room capacity in hotels, I believe, in Dublin, for example, is 93%. We just don't have the hotel rooms, plus the prices, and you want to bring 500,000 people. They claim there wouldn't have been that many, but you want to bring all these people here. Where are you going to put them? And one guy came back to me on Twitter. He said, actually, you could put them on campsites. Loads of my mates went to a World Cup and stayed in a campsite, and they thought it was great. And I thought, and you wonder why we lost this bid, that it was some sort of kind of, always a fix in favour of South Africa, and then, France bought it.
Yeah.
We don't have anything. I mean, we Fitzgerald Stadium in Killarney doesn't have floodlights. McHale Park and Castlebar, you'd get piles if you sat down for too long on the stone slabs there. Casement Park, this sums up the kind of back of the pub political nonsense that we swallow, but that the world stage just threw back at us. Casement Park, you go in for a bid, doesn't even have planning permission.
No, there was no planning permission in place, and we had it down as a as a venue for matches. I thought that's staggering.
As a venue, I thought this was under 6 years to go. We've no public transport. Can you imagine? I don't know if anyone, I don't drive, but if anyone's ever tried to get from Killarney to Galway, it's an interesting experience because you end up on trains through Cork, back to Port Harlington, on to Kildare and back to Galway.
But the argument was, sure, it'll be great crack.
Well, it is, and I'm delighted because that's always the Irish kind of thing. Sure, we'd be great at it, and if we don't get it, it's someone else's fault. It's our fault for putting together this absolutely rubbish bid. When this started in 2013 and Leo Varadkar decided, we'll put this out on the world stage, I actually thought it was deflection politics. I thought he was trying to kind of take the pressure off other areas of the Fine Gael government and what they were doing wrong.
Well, you were right about that.
See, I don't think so. I actually started thinking in the last couple of weeks that it was delusion politics because things that are wrong in this country, like homelessness and stuff.
Yeah.
Varadkar will say, sure, it's not bad by international standards. He sent your man, is it Damien English?
Oh, yeah.
He sent him out to say, it's ruining our reputation. The old multinationals don't like us talking about this. They don't care. They've nothing to deflect from. They don't care about these problems.
I thought Damien English was going to suggest that the 3,124 homeless children each get an Ireland rugby jersey. And, I genuinely said, that's all we're short of doing. Just put an Ireland rugby jersey on them and tell them everything's grand now, But I do think you're onto something about when you say delusion politics, because what I think we have is whether it's a Stockholm syndrome where we're trapped in this horrible civil war politics of because like while we're talking here now, there's a risk a government might fall. I don't see it happening because I don't think that it's.
I do.
Yeah, but I can see. I don't see the Minister for Justice surviving much longer. And it's really going to be that's the call because. Yeah, where we stand is, but like imagine all that's going to happen is posters will go up and we have to vote. Turkeys will literally be voting for Christmas at Christmas if that happens. And
it's incompetence. I mean, you mentioned the Minister for Justice. I mean, it's pure incompetence. But I remember working in politics many years ago briefly, and there was a local councillor. I won't name him. But
go on.
No, I won't because he was never going to make it on the big stage as much as he wanted to get on Dáil tickets. But he one November it would have been the pipes froze under his living room. So his solution to this was he pulled up the carpet, he covered his living room floor in hay, he lit the hay on fire. And he came into the office of the TD I was working for at the time. He came into the office and said, geez, well, it solved one problem. And the TD I was working for had to turn around and say, was there not a downside? And he goes, well, yeah, the house has really bad smoke damage now. And it reminds me of so much of the short-term thinking. Obviously a very extreme example, but it's the kind of thinking that it transcends onto the national stage in terms of our politics, that it's putting out one fire all the time while two more start. Everything is short term, and headed by Varadkar now. And when I saw it, it was Justin Trudeau in Ireland, or was Varadkar in Canada, or something a while back.
They've done both. They've both visited.
I cannot stand Justin Trudeau, and to see all this fawning over him, nor can I stand Varadkar, because they're part of this generation of politicians now, the fitted shirt generation. Do you know that is? It is. What's your policy? A fitted shirt. What's your stance on this? A look at my designer stubble. They stand for absolutely nothing. They make it up as they go along, and everything they do is so staged and so false. Even the photo I saw of Varadkar showing his green socks to Theresa May and stuff.
I think that this socks thing. I think if the only thing that you have that's in any way exciting about you is the socks you wear with your drab blue or grey suit, if that's your shtick, is your little socks,
your unique selling point,
man, you've got nothing.
No, and it's so planned and it's so false, and it's look at that Amadai Wild. I mean, geez, if you want to see Wild, when I'm home in December, you can go on the beer with me for a night and we'll try Wild. You know, not this. And you also know someone like that with their cheesy smile and all these little acts. You know when the door closes and the camera is not in sight, you know they just lose the plot and they're not a very nice person.
But what I find very striking about Leo is that if you imagine you pitched it to someone in the you were talking to someone in the New York Times or something and said, we have this guy, and you actually gave a bullet point resume of him. He sounds absolutely flawless but he just the actual the sum of his parts just don't add up. There hasn't been, and people have really. It's really started to come to the fore in the last couple of days. Like yesterday, the Cian Corla absolutely put him in his box. I don't know if you saw it. It was a brilliant little 45-second thing where Leo decided that he was being asked awkward questions around Maurice McCabe, and he said, well, I don't have a lawyer. I need a lawyer to give us advice, and maybe Cian Corla, you could get a lawyer to come into the chambers. And the Cian Corla answered. He said, I'm not a lawyer either, but I have common sense. And Leo Varadkar nearly died.
But I think the Washington Post, when Varadkar took, it may have been the New York Times, Washington Post, one of the big American papers. Anyhow, they had a profile of him, and they talked about kind of the son of an immigrant.
God, yeah. So sick.
He's gay, he's trendy, he's all these things. And I just looked at it and I thought, you could cross out all those words and just kind of scribble in Thatcherite.
Yeah,
Tory. Describe him more aptly.
I'm glad your word started with T, because mine started with W. You know?
He's
well, as long as it didn't start with C, which I learned is not acceptable on Twitter recently.
We're not that kind of podcast.
Like, sort of moving on to the C's, you've got a lot of flack from, C's, W's over
Conor McGregor.
Give us a little fill in on that.
Do you know what? I've heard a few times these people being described as the new confident Ireland, in that they go out, their chests out and their chins up, and they're not hiding their passport in their arse pocket, and they're proud to be Irish and blah, blah, blah. And I just thought, there is nothing confident about being absolute sheep. There is nothing confident in living your life through a sports star who says odious things, but when he does, that becomes the new acceptable because you're scared to have a go. You've thrown your lot in with McGregor to such an extent. You're scared to say anything against him. I had a beer with Melbourne recently. He was in Brazil, and he said it is a nightmare, the Irish in Melbourne, when McGregor fights. He said within an hour of the finish of it, they're all ripping off their T-shirts, looking to scrap with anything that moves. And this is the new confident Ireland. Mother of Jesus, give me the old miserable Ireland any day of the week.
when Rocky first came out, when the Rocky movies first came out, the Italians did the same in New York. They all thought they were Rocky.
It's pathetic, isn't it?
I don't know.
I gotta tell it. There was years ago. There's a friend of mine who a little bit older than me, but a very successful powerlifter, like an actual, Olympic standard powerlifter, lovely fella, mild fella, and you wouldn't give him a second glance, but really at a level. And but I remember when they started in the gyms and the steroid culture came in, and the guys that were doing steroids, and we used to, they were at one end, you were at the other end, and all the rest of it. And then fast forward 10 years, and I'm at a gym, and I'm looking around, and I'm seeing these guys, and I went, "Oh, there's the steroid gang again." And I literally thought there was the steroid gang again, because I could see you can hear the rattle of pills, and you know what's happening, and you're kind of thinking, okay, that's unusual. But what was really funny about it was they were selling two things, and this I nearly had to run out of the place because I couldn't stop laughing, and I thought I was going to get killed for laughing. They were selling tanning products to one another as well as steroids, and these lads were, and he goes, Have you got two more bottles of the Tambos? And I went, the Tambos? What are Tambos? They were taking these tanning products, and I just thought, oh God, and this is the new normal,
Yeah, it's But educate yourself on MMA, Tony. You need to educate yourself, is what they all say. And it's amazing how they learn all these lines. That's how much sheep they are. And it almost comes to, they start using this term, which they've obviously robbed from the American alt-right as well, snowflake.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And I was trying to define it recently, and I think I hit a definition. I think what a snowflake is someone who used to have common decency, but the bar has dropped so far that everyone else is left staring up at them.
Yeah.
I think that's what the
That's
snowflake
not bad,
is.
yeah.
I like that now because there's so much wrong with the language now in terms of, you know, as you said, snowflake, or a simple thing like I did the Dublin Marathon, and I the amount of people when I put my tweets up who went below it and said, look at this virtue signaling moron, or whatever they were calling me, and I'm just going like, oh no, I'm really trying to raise money for inner city helping homeless. It's not like I'm just putting it out there, folks. I'm gonna do it, but like, you know, it was a good 20% of people who decided that I was a liberal snowflake who was just virtue signalling. And
Well, we got that a while back on one of the pods we did. We sort of offended the alt-right in Ireland, and they came and they were going snowflake this, snowflake that, and I'm like, well, I just punch Nazis. And then they decided that I was threatening.
yeah,
Which was very funny. This guy...
Well, do you know what I also noticed is I had some dealings with the far left in England for a while as well, over some stuff on Twitter, and it kind of reinforced the view that obviously the political spectrum is U-shaped as opposed to a straight line. The similarities are unbelievable. Even the way they go about trying to get at you, they'll abuse you and abuse you and abuse you, and the minute you say a word back that's anyway slightly aggressive, oh, you said that, that's disgraceful, etc.
That's completely it. Well, the funny thing about this guy was he said, you threatened me, and I said, well, only if you identify as a Nazi. And he just couldn't get it. You know, he just couldn't get it.
Oh, there's knuckle draggers. I mean, there's a serious amount of them out there.
I don't want to even go. All I'd say to you is this wouldn't be even a normal knuckle dragger. This guy is a lecturer in DCU. So,
well, I wouldn't know much. I failed college miserably. I hated it.
What did you do in college, Ewan?
I went and studied arts in UCD. I didn't know if I wanted to be a journalist or that, and I studied economics, politics, and Italian. And I was only 16 for my first while in college, first month, and I turned 17 then. And I came from a small school in Athy. Well, it was obviously a small school. There wasn't going to be a big school in Athy. I remember going into the economics lecture the first day, and there were 600 people and all these D4 types, and they all knew each other from college. And I found it bloody terrifying, and I was amazingly shy back then. And I used to work up the courage to say hello to someone at the end of a lecture, and she wouldn't see them again for 3 months.
Yeah.
And they put a big red X across my my college ID, which means I couldn't drink in the bar or enter the bar after 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
Which is where everyone met and where you kind of got your Dutch courage at that age to go and talk to people and make friends. And in the end, by the finish, I'd started working in the Sunday Tribune as a sub, right at the bottom there. And I didn't tell my parents, but I'd go in and sub instead of going to college because I liked it that much more. And in the end, in the RDS, my last Italian exam, I knew I'd failed because there was 9, I think, modules in Italian. And I thought there was 8, so I didn't go to this one up here.
You couldn't count the 9 in Italian.
Well, I remember the invigilator coming up. I put my hand up straight away, and he didn't see me, so I knew I'd failed this, and you had to spend the first 15 minutes in the exam. So I just rolled up my sheet of paper with my name and stuff on it, and I went up and gave it to him. I thought I was doing him a favour, and he turned around and he said, "You don't come to me, I come to you." And I turned around and I said to him, pardon the language, I said, "Shove it up your hole, will you?" And I walked out of there. And it was the greatest relief I've ever felt, knowing I never had to go back to that place. I'd love to go back someday, though. It'd be like old school.
Oh, yeah.
What if you got a doctorate in years to come, got the old Bertie Ahern thing where they put you in the nice cap and gown and brought you back in for an honorary? Would you go for that?
Oh yeah, I'm a complete sellout.
That's it. I was like, it's someone said to me recently, yeah, no, you're doing this, and you're kind of, what if the Department of Finance? Oh no, forget you, Mark, you're gone.
Well, I don't think it's one I have to worry about, though. I don't think it's a choice I'm going to have to make down the line.
No, we won't go there. Just to kind of moving on. I know what we've spoken about. Obviously, the Rugby World Cup. We've spoken about the Conor McGregor. I mentioned at the start you have you don't like Dublin GAA, the behemoth.
Go easy, please.
Yeah, tread softly for you tread on my dreams. But
this is a myth. I have no problem with Dublin GAA. In fact, one of my earliest memories of Dublin GAA, and I hope all the boys over at Reservoir Dubs or whatever it's called listen to this.
Yeah.
It was the 1991 league semi-finals, I think. It was a double header, Kildare, Donegal, Dublin, Roscommon. Now, I'm fairly sure, or maybe it was Dublin, Donegal, whatever, anyhow, they were the semi-finals. And I remember I stood up, Kildare were playing first, Dublin were in the second game, and Kildare were winning, and every time they'd score, I'd stand up. I was, I was 7 years old, with my flag and wave it.
Yeah.
And this Moyer comes down from the back of the old Cusick stand, the upper tier, and he eats me out of it, and he tells me if I wave that flag again, I'll break it over my knee. I can't, I'm trying to watch the game, etc., etc. And there were these two Dublin fellas in front of me, and fair play, they turned around to my dad and they said, that's disgraceful. Why don't you swap seats? Your flag won't be blocking them here.
Yeah.
And I remember my dad went home and he wrote a letter to the GAA about his 7-year-old son and the abuse he got from, I may have only been 6 actually still at the time, but the abuse I got from the Moyer. So the GAA, in all their wisdom to apologise, sent this 6 or 7-year-old out an official GAA tie.
You were just short the cufflinks, were you?
But so no, I've absolutely no problem with Dublin, and Dublin have done everything brilliantly. They've done it too well. My problem is only with the GAA, which some Dublin fans might think that is the GAA, but it's not. Dublin is not the GAA. It's bigger than that. My problem is the GAA throwing money at one county, which has. I don't know how Dublin people argue against this. It has the population of a province. It gets more money than any province, yet it fields one team. It's bizarre.
Mick Clifford said something similar when Dublin won this year. He said, why isn't Dublin split into two teams? And my argument to this is, what are you going to do when it's Dublin North v Dublin South in the final and you still can't get anybody else into it?
Well, that's fair enough. But there's no province has two teams. You'd have to start with 5 or 6 to begin with. But it has never been about Dublin winning for me.
Splinter us down. You're so awful.
No. I mean, I hate seeing this online every time anyone wins. Like when Rathnew beat Vincent's recently. Split Rathnew into two. So my point has never been about Dublin winning. If Dublin hadn't won a game for the last 20 years, I still think they should be split. Because of that population and because of the money. Now, the money might be redressed slightly, but I think it's gone too far.
The money imbalance, like I think I saw, and you may even know this better, but I saw a statistic which was brilliant. It was something like Dublin's 31st biggest sponsor. It gives them the same money as I think it was Roscommon's number 1 sponsor or something like that.
It's nuts, and whatever about sponsorship, but I don't even believe in pooling sponsorship because I think counties lose incentive then to actually go out and get the best sponsor they can because it doesn't make as much of a difference. But I mean, it's the GAA between 2010 and 2014. I'm looking at the stats here. Per player across those 5 seasons. Per registered club player, Mayo got €22.30, Tyrone got 21, Kerry got 19, Dublin got 274.70. Now, Dublin people will then turn around and say, oh, well, the game has so much room to grow, more money is needed in Dublin because of that population. Yeah. Well, then let's focus on the population. It can't be both because the way a lot of Dublin people who will come back and say they want the money based on the potential population, but they want to be viewed as they've only a small fraction of that population playing. It can't be both. It has to be one or the other if you're with me. We're either going on the potential or the reality. So you only get the money on the players that are currently there,
Yeah, but I'm not arguing with you from a logical point of view. I'm arguing as I'm still the young fella standing on Hill 16, wishing that I remember turning to my daughter and we went in, and I said, it was 1995 was the last time, and now it's like obviously it's an era of dominance, and it is getting to the point where I remember. Going back to Twitter, after Dublin after Cluxton kicks the free, social media almost said, "Well, let them have one," and let them have that one now because they haven't won it for a while, and sure they can have that one. And about 15 minutes later, it said, the tone changed to, Jesus, those arrogant dubs, and we're going, and it's, But like in all seriousness, I do think the money needs to be addressed. I don't know how I feel about splitting it. I almost think the problem is, from a kid's point of view, is what hope have you got of breaking into the inter-county team in Dublin if in that pool of players that is absolutely vast compared to other counties. Dennis Bastick retired this week. He's actually a very good friend of mine. And Dennis made his inter-county debut at age 28 and broke in very late. Had a very rough road in discipline problems. It was never far from a red card for his first few years. And it's I think it's widely enough known that he threw his lot in with Laois almost at one stage because he thought his opportunity with Dublin was just going to pass him by. Dennis managed to, he's retired now with 5 All-Ireland medals in his arse pocket and more Leinster titles than I can count. But I think stories like that are actually going to be few and far between now, and that's my only gripe with Dublin GAA.
Well, you see, Dublin, I think they've about 2.9% of the population playing, and the average across the rest of the country is about 8%. Now, if Dublin got up to that 8%, that'd be another 70,500 players, which is more than double the amount of this year's other 3 semi-finalists combined, which is terrifying. Now, the rest of the country does not want Dublin's handoffs either, because that's they don't want hand-me-downs. It's about identity.
Yeah.
And the problem with the money thing is the beast that's been created is now almost self-sustaining.
Yeah.
But if you were to start giving the money that Dublin GAA have been getting per player, I think I was working out it would cost the GAA 94 million euros a year. But they don't have that. And then there was the 5 million from the government, over 1 million a year for 5 years through Bertie. I mean, they've just got... What we have now is Dublin are out of sight. And the GAA's solution is going to be to give still less money to other counties who have a population disadvantage and expect them to somehow close the gap. It just means the gap will get wider slower.
Well, you look at what Kildare did this year. They did a lot of private finance. They drove fundraisers. They managed to bring back a couple of good young players, and the future looks bright in that. But that's purely, that's not. I don't know how sustainable that is when you consider Dublin have a full-time business development manager out there getting in sponsorship and deals. So
it is bright to the point. They still got beaten off the pitch in the Leinster final by 9 points. 9 points would have been considered an absolute walloping a decade ago in any provincial final. Whereas now, Jesus, that's great. They kept it to single figures. That's the level, and the GAA is dying on its feet elsewhere because Dublin always said, we've these other sports to contend with. The rest of the country now does as well. And if you're an elite athlete at 13 or 14 in Laois or Kildare or Carlow or anywhere else, you're not going to choose GAA because you're watching this. You're never going to win anything. So now you have rugby clubs, tennis clubs, soccer clubs, canoeing clubs, everything across the country. You're obviously going to choose one of them because if you're of that standard an athlete, you want to win, and the GAA does not give an option to these teams to win anymore.
But that's also why we're losing guys to Australia. You can make a living out of being a professional sports person in other sports. You just can't in GAA.
Yeah, but it's terrifying. I mean, the Kildare team that played Dublin this year, I think 4 of them of the starting team had been professional athletes. Kevin Feely had been a professional soccer player in England. Paddy Brophy, Daniel Flynn, and there was one more, had just come back from Australia. And they still couldn't compete. They still got wiped off the pitch after doing their absolute best. I mean, Kildare played really well that day. And that's Kildare. Kildare have an awful lot more going for them than most counties.
Yes, they do. They do.
Well, on that pessimistic note, I'm not gonna labour on, other than to say that the drive for 5 is alive and well in Dublin.
Yeah, very much so.
I'd say I'd be aiming at 10. I'd be disappointed if you didn't set your sights bigger.
Well, I did think that maybe the solution to this is that if there was, and the country is split this way, it's Dublin against everybody else. Why doesn't the rest of the country field an all-star team, come up once a year, see if they can beat Dublin?
Well, a day in the big smoke with the ham sandwiches wrapped up. Well, and anyone, by the way, on that, people do say, why split Dublin, amalgamate other counties? Well, part of the whole thing, the money was pumped into GAA to increase participation levels. By amalgamating, you're losing participation levels because you're limiting openings for players.
Yeah, no.
So there.
We're not. Well, I think we can all agree that we just have to disagree. But,
yeah, absolutely.
No, like and I don't know. Like I do want to bring this towards the end, but I just want, like, first of all, I want to say, it's great. Thanks very much for coming on and joining us. It's been great to have you on. The actual. We may actually take you up on that point now in the run up to Christmas. If you're around, we definitely I'll even pick you up at the airport and bring you to the Diggers myself.
But he make you pay for the drink.
I've been known to have an occasional snifter of port in December.
Yeah, but Tony makes you pay. That's the catch.
Do they accept Hayal there? Do they?
We'll dance for money. So yeah, no. Look, thanks very much for joining us. Thanks for coming on. It's been great to have you on. Great to listen to you.
Yeah, and it's been an absolute pleasure. Delighted to talk with you. You're somebody I wanted to talk with for a long time. Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome, but I hope my levels of anger didn't disappoint here today, now, because I'm in good form today.
Yeah, we got you in good form, and I have to say, like, I don't feel at all bruised or battered,
Well, we'll save that for grave diggers,
Yeah. Ewan, listen, mate, really appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Lads, anytime at all. Absolute pleasure.
All right, thanks a lot.
Ewan.
Cheers.
Take care.
I just want to thank you all for listening and remind you that you can subscribe to us on iTunes, SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Please take a minute and leave us a review, and don't forget to tell your friends. You can send us an email to theechochamberpod@gmail.com or follow us on Twitter @echochamberspod. Thanks again, folks.